Welcome to Bits and Pieces Quilting. Today we are going to dive a little deeper into bag making and work together to make the Koda Cross-Body Bag. So stay tuned. Hi, I'm Michelle, and today I'm really excited to make with you the Koda Cross-Body Bag. This isn't my pattern, but it's a free pattern, and I have the details down below in the description box where you can go and get the pattern and join in this project. It's a great little bag. I have a couple of them now because I like it so much, and so I wanted to share it with you. I made this one out of my very favorite Anna Maria Horner fabric, and it has turned out just beautifully. I've learned a few things along the way, and I'll share those with you, and I hope you'll join in. So go and get the free pattern for the Koda Cross-Body Bag, and let's dive right in. These are the two Koda Cross-Body Bags that I've already made. I love this bag, as you can see. This is the first one I made where I followed the instructions almost completely to the letter, and I really like it. It turned out really, really well. I did change the bottom of the bag, and we'll get to that step when we get to that step. I didn't line the inside pocket, so this is all just a layer of quilting cotton. I did use a cotton drill on the outside, so that's a little thicker and a little bit of interfacing. I used this canvas that I told you about in the first video that Jason rescued for me from a shipment at the office. It has no lining behind it, or no interfacing behind it, and then no interfacing or anything on the inside. It's a great bag. There are also no pockets on the inside, and you'll see again as we get to that stage, I'm going to add some pockets for the inside because I like having little places to tuck things into my handbag. But it turned out really beautifully. I learned a few lessons as well. I almost always wear my bag on the left side of my body, which means it would sort of hang off my body this way. And so I would have preferred to put this hardware on the other side so that it comes across the front of my body. At this point, this hardware sits on the back of my body. So again, another lesson learned, and I'll pay attention to that. I paid attention to that in the second version, and we'll pay attention to that today as we make this bag. And now I can hear you saying, oh, I'm a quilter. I don't have any hardware. I don't really want to buy any hardware. Don't you worry, I've got you covered. We'll go through this video today with all of the hardware that you need, but I'm going to make a video to follow this one. I'm going to call it No Hardware, No Problem. And I'll show you how you can make a version of this bag without any hardware at all, just with regular quilting cotton and some batting. So I hope you'll stay tuned and come back for that one. So this was my first version. The second version was this one with the Anna Maria Horner fabric, which I love. I really wanted to make sure I had perfected this before I cut into my very favorite fabric. This is just quilting cotton, but it has a fairly stiff interfacing behind it. I lined the pocket with interfacing as well, so there's an extra layer of rigidity there because the pocket is fully lined. I added some pockets on the inside. Probably, I don't know if you can see that, but added some pockets in here. Made sure I changed the hardware a little bit actually. I made it so that the strap is removable, which means then the hardware sits on the side of the body that I wanted it to. And I boxed the corners again. So these are some adjustments that we will continue to make as we go through the step-by-step sew along for this Koda Cross-Body Bag. Really happy with this version of it. Really like the way that it looks. But I will take on board some of Denise's comments. If you watch that video when I spoke to a friend who's an expert bag maker, she was saying that the weakest points on these clips are right here and at the swivel points. And so while the strap is removable, I may have actually weakened the overall structure by doing that. So something to consider. For this next version, I'm not going to make a removable strap. I have enough webbing that it doesn't need to be a strap that I can change from bag to bag. So some interesting points to consider there. And if I decide to make some more bags, and I probably will, I think I'll probably invest in slightly higher quality hardware. I think the D-rings are great, but I think these little clips are fairly on the low end of things in terms of quality. So to get started, I have all the materials here laid out. The instructions in the pattern are really good. I'll show you where I have differed a little bit. So I have the front panel and I have an interfacing, and I'm using this interfacing that I just got at my local fabric store. It's very thin, but it's also very rigid, and it's iron-on, so I can feel the side that has the glue on it. In my chat with Denise, it was really clear that the subject of interfacing is vast, but a lot of it is trial and error. So I have some of this. I was happy with the way that it worked with the Anna Maria Horner bag, and so I'm going to use it here as well. For my upper panel, I'm going to use more of this beautiful unbleached cotton canvas that Jason got for me, and it's actually already been fused to the same interfacing. I'm going to use the same fabric for the back with the interfacing. I'm going to line, this is going to be the pocket that's going to go inside the front here with a zipper. I've already folded it around a piece of interfacing. This is not fusible, and it's actually just some interfacing I have here again as well. I would or could use this same one, but because I have this, I'm just going to use this piece. That's going to give the pocket in the front a nice amount of rigidity. Then we need a zipper for the top of the bag. So this zipper goes here in the middle, a zipper for the top of the bag, a couple of pieces of fabric that are the zipper tabs, the two pieces of hardware, this ring to hold the strap on, and then this ring to make it adjustable. I still have quite a lot of my webbing that I bought just at the hardware store. This is the 1-inch black webbing, so that's what the strap is going to be. And then my lining is this same fabric. I'm not going to do anything in terms of lining the lining, putting interfacing on the lining. And I am going to add another pocket on the inside. This isn't part of the pattern, but I've just cut another piece of fabric that's the same width as the lining. And it's actually the same as this pocket here. So I believe from the pattern, it's 10.5 by 10.25. And I'm going to put another piece of interfacing into this pocket as well. Oh, look, my interfacing is not the right size. That's probably fine because I want my pocket to be a little bit narrower than my lining is to be able to sew it in. So that is going to be on the inside. So that's one difference already from the pattern, is this inside pocket, as well as lining the pockets to give them a bit more rigidity. So those are all the materials. I'm going to step over to the iron. I'm going to do all of the fusing. So I'm going to fuse the front and the back, the front and the interfacing, and the back and the interfacing. And then I'm going to sew the inside of the inside pocket. And I'm going to do that by flipping this over, sewing down both sides, turning it right side out so that I can then insert this interfacing just to give it that rigidity. So I'll come back and check in then, and then we'll talk about doing the zippers and getting those prepped. All right, I have my pieces fused together, front and back, and then this piece was already fused. And then I took the inside pocket piece over to the sewing machine and I sewed down these sides. Let me just unfold it here and show you. Pop those corners back out. I just sewed down the sides like this. I used a 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. This pattern calls for a 3/8 seam allowance through the whole pattern, just to make sure everything fits. Then I just clipped these corners so that it would be easier to get a nice turn on this. Turned it right side out, pressed it nice and popped those corners out, and then gave it a nice press. And so now what I will do is I will slide this perfectly cut piece of interfacing. I thought I had made a mistake earlier. It is a little too long, so I will need to trim it off the edge there. But I will slide this interfacing inside here and then do a nice top stitch just across the top here, both just to give the pocket a nice little edge, but also just to secure that interfacing inside the pocket. So I'm going to go do that in a minute, but then we're also going to prep the zipper tabs. So your zippers, according to the pattern, need to be 9.25 inches. And my zippers are, I think they call these 12-inch zippers. If you measure from here, from the tip to just about the end of the zipper. It's a 12-inch zipper. And so I am going to cut these to 9 1/4. And this is always a little nerve-wracking. You've got to be a little bit careful here that your zipper doesn't come undone, especially these less than expensive ones. And by that I mean cheap ones. These are not like the zipper tapes that you can just pull back together with a zipper tab. So I'm going to cut those ends off carefully. I will measure these to be 9 1/4, and I'm just going to use my mat here, I think. So 9 1/4 is here, like that. Cut one side, use that side to cut the other, and then I'll repeat that for the second zipper. Then the next step from the pattern is to sew these zipper tabs on. And just, I think with a 1/4-inch seam allowance, or maybe not, no, maybe, I think a little wider. I'm just going to double check the pattern. I have it on my computer here just in front of me. Nope, the pattern does say to sew it just a 1/4-inch from the end. So I will do that as instructed on both the front and the back of both of these zippers, and then we'll come back and talk about the next step. So did you pick up on my mistake from earlier when I was talking about the lining for the pocket? I've just discovered it now. So editing, Michelle, will put a note at the beginning of the video so that you know where the mistake is, but I somehow thought that I was only going to line one side of the pocket, and I think I was confused with this pocket that I'm putting into the inside of the bag, which uses the back of the lining as the other side of the pocket, and so I think that's where I got confused. But this front pocket needs a full piece of interfacing, which is what I have added now. So apologies for that. The editing notes should catch it, and hopefully you don't make the same mistake that I did. So now that the zipper pieces are ready, and I will say as well on the zipper, so the first zipper, you just sew a 1/4-inch seam, flip it back, and add the top stitching, just like the instructions. The second zipper, you attach it with a 1/4-inch seam and then fold the edges around and top stitch. What I did, however, was tuck in just the teeniest little bit so that I don't have a raw edge here. I think in the future I'm going to make a note in the pattern that instead of cutting this at 1 1/4 inches square, I'll add an extra 1/4 inch so I can fold that raw edge under before tucking it and doing that top stitching. But I think I got a little tiny smidge of it there, so I've got a nice little clean edge, which I'm happy about. So the next step is to take, and it's really clear in the pattern, where you place the front zipper for the pocket, which is this one with the tabs not folded over. This goes right side up on the lining of your pocket. And then you add, and you know what, I'm just going to clip it so that I know it's exactly in the right spot. And I have to work with this facing me rather than facing the camera. Sometimes I can do things backwards, but in this case, it's just better for my brain if I don't. Then we add the front larger panel, and mine's directional. So I want to make sure that my, and this is where we have to visualize, right? I want to make sure, because the pocket is going to come down like, hang on. I want to make sure that this goes like this. So this is right side up. I want right side up on the clips. And I always do this when I'm doing something like this. I will clip this in place, and then I will imagine where the sewing line is going to be. So this will get sewn, of course, and then flipped that way. And then this gets pulled back this way to become the pocket. This comes up to go to the zipper, and I can see that I've got it right. And I always do this because I've made enough mistakes to know that this double checking visualization is really important to getting it right. So as I open this zipper, I can see that my pocket is going to be done properly and my front panel is right side up. So phew! So I'm going to take this over to the machine and sew this, and the pattern says to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. So I will do that. Then to press both of these away from the zipper and add a piece of top stitching right across here. So I'm going to go off and do that and be right back. So this is looking really smart already. I've got the inside of the pocket here, just as the instructions said, gave it a good press and put that top stitching right across here. And so our next step is to bring the pocket up to the zipper here, like this, and to put the top part of the bag, of the front panel, into place. Clip all of this into place. Sew again with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Press this back and do the same thing with some top stitching. So I'm going to go do that, and the front part of this bag will be already finished. It's going to look so good. And then I'm just going to double check the computer here just to make sure that we are following the steps. Then we need to add the hardware. So we will do, and the top zipper. So we will do that. But because we're adding the inside pocket, I'm also going to take a moment and put the inside pocket on one of my lining pieces. And to do that, I am just going to center this a little bit higher to the top of the bag because I want to box the corners. So I want to make sure that it's a little bit higher up. And I'm going to just attach it to the lining with some stop stitching here as well as down the center. So I have 2 pockets in my lining. So with those 2 steps, I'm going to head off to the machine and then be right back. Hello, so this is Editing Michelle. Let me explain what's going on here. It looks like the video where I describe what's happened with this pocket has disappeared into the ether. So I'm going to do this little voiceover video over with this little photo to explain what's going on. What I should have done is laid the pocket so that the top of the pocket was towards the bottom of the lining, sewed the seam, and then folded the pocket back so that the raw edge for the pocket at the bottom was inside at the bottom. But instead, what I did was I just sewed down the sides and sewed down the middle of the pocket to divide it, and then realized I had no way to seal the bottom. And I was far too lazy to unpick it all because of the interfacing and all of the layers of fabric, and I was just way too lazy. So instead, what I did is I took the lining and I just folded it over and then stitched across it so that it would seal up the bottom of the pocket. It shortened the bag by about 1/2 inch, but that was a quick and easy solution. And I videotaped all of this, and I have no idea where the footage went. So I wanted to jump in. You'll be able to see through the rest of the video this little fold in that lining piece, but I wanted to explain what happened and what I did. I honestly just didn't have the time or the energy or the materials to go all the way back and start over and re-record again. So a little bit of problem solving, but just know that this is truly authentic. I'm filming it as I go. Let's carry on. The next instruction is to start with your lining fabric and to take your hardware and a piece of the strap. I've cut this webbing at 2 inches, and to place this with the zipper on the lining. So if you look at the pictures in the pattern, it shows to line your zipper up like this, and then to put your hardware over here. Well, as we talked about at the beginning, I have learned, and I've tested this, that I actually want this on the front of the bag. So I'm going to move it over here. This is just a personal preference. It has nothing to do with the structure or the effectiveness of the bag. And I've also learned from experience that I want a good amount. I don't want to line this up just on the edge. I want a good amount of this. I'm going to move this over to the lighter part here so you can see it. I want a good amount of this webbing overhanging the edge. I have found on some of my other projects, if the webbing is too close to the seam, then the webbing starts, you can see it starting to pull, and I worry about it fraying because this is a pretty thick material. So I want that webbing nice and close, sorry, a little bit of overlap. And then I also want it almost as tight as possible, if that makes sense. I don't want this piece to be too big. I don't want a whole lot of flexibility in here for this piece of hardware. So I'm going to go over and I'm going to lightly baste this according to the instructions, but I have moved this over, added a bit of overhang here, and made sure that this piece is as short as possible. With this now basted into place, we flip this over, and you can see now my hardware is on the side I want it to be on. We flip this over and then sew across here with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Once that's sewn, I'll flip this back over and around like this and give it a 1/4 inch top, a very tight top stitching across the edge. I've zoomed you in a little bit because I wanted just to show you a few of the things that I did here. I made sure that this piece was as small as I could make it and still get my presser foot over that space. I didn't want a lot of room for this to move too freely. And if we open this up on the inside, you can see that I've got a little bit of this webbing hanging out over the edge here. I definitely wanted that little extra. And when I was sewing this, I backstitched back and forth over this just a few times, just to really reinforce that area and just to try and make that nice and strong. So I have basted my 60-inch piece of webbing, which is the strap. I have basted that to the top of the zipper as per the instructions, but I'm on the other side of the zipper, again, because I want the hardware in the front. And the next step is to add the backing parts of the bag. So we put the lining first, and we put that right side up like this. And then I want the back, and again, I want mine right side up. So I'm going to put it face down, right side up. I'm going to clip all of this, and then I'm going to double check because I want to make sure this is right. I'm dealing with directional fabric, and I really want to make sure that I've got the zipper in between the lining and the backing where it needs to be, and that everything is just lined up the way that it's supposed to be. So let me clip all of this together, and then we're going to do that same kind of test. So this is going to get unfolded, and that's excellent. That's going to be right side up across the back. I've got the lining going on in here, and when that gets pulled back, excellent. That's going to have the zipper all nice and finished on the inside. The lining is lined up properly, and the back is lined up properly. So fold that back. I always do that test because I can't tell you how many times I mess that up. So that's reassuring. I've got some clips in place here. I'm just going to futz around with it a little bit more just to make sure everything is lined up perfectly. You can see where my strap is sticking out a little bit. That's exactly what I want. I'm going to go back and forth over that a little bit more just to really secure it into place. And I'm also going to really make sure that this is out of the way as I go about sewing that seam. So now we have a front and a back and some pockets, and it's all starting to look fantastic. I will point out a few things that are a bit of a mistake on my part. I didn't center this as well as I should have, so I will end up trimming a little bit off of here, and I will probably end up trimming a little bit off of this side as well, just to square things up a little bit. So be careful when you're lining things up and don't make the same mistake I did. The pattern also talks about running a basting stitch down this side so that your pocket is held properly in place. I'm not going to do that simply because I have such a thick piece of interfacing on my pocket. It's not shifting anywhere. I'm not worried about it landing in place properly or not. But if you've just used a piece of cotton as your pocket, you will want to do that. You will want to run that basting stitch between the pocket and the front of your bag. So I'm going to trim these up, and then the pattern also talks about cutting some darts to finish the bottom of the bag. This was not my preference. I didn't like the way this looked. So what I decided to do, and I'm just going to grab my other one, what I decided to do was to make boxed corners instead. This gives me a bit of a wider base. It does shorten the bag a little bit from what the pattern tells you the final dimensions are, but that doesn't bother me. I like the way this looks, and I didn't want to deal with the darts. So that's the way I'm going to show you how to do it. after I get this squared up a little bit. I just shaved this tiny smidge off of the back with the front, the lining, and the interfacing. And I was going to try and shave a smidge off of here as well, but as I'm looking at this, I think I can just line it up carefully and catch that any extra in the seam allowance, and it should be just fine. So the next step is to pull your front pieces and your back pieces together like this. And this is where we're going to align everything all up, clip it or pin it in place, and then sew all the way around the outside edge of the bag, leaving a gap here in the bottom. Once we do that, then I will show you how to box the corners. And as you can imagine, we turn it all right side out. It's called birthing a bag, which is something that Denise told me was an expression I'd never heard before, but it makes perfect sense as you try and squish a very large thing through a very small space. So we're going to, start and stop, make sure that you back stitch. Make sure you leave this gap wide enough. I am always guilty of leaving this space way too small. So make sure you leave a good 4 or 5 inch gap here because, well, I'm holding my hands like this. How big is this? This is a 5 inch gap. You really want to make sure you have enough space to get your bag out. And I'll tell you, the thicker you're interfacing, the bigger you want this space to be, because this is going to be hard enough, especially with the pocket and the lining on the front and the interfacing, to push out through that space. So reinforce the edges, but leave a nice wide gap here. Also, make sure that your handle is all tucked up inside. You don't want it caught in the seam, and you certainly don't want it dangling out any of the sides. So with this sewn all the way around and a nice gap that has started and stopping, I want to make the boxed corners. And so it's quite easy on this lining fabric because it's quite thin. So I'll show you the technique here. You essentially pull this like this. You pull it into a triangle and you can line up this seam with this seam. And then what I do is I pick a distance. And so for something like this, I'm probably going to go with just about an inch. And let me show you how I do that. So I'm going to grab a couple of clips. I should have some clips here. This takes a little bit of manipulation. I like to have my seams open so that I can line them up on both sides like this. And you can feel it with your hands. You can feel that it's lined up. And that feels pretty good. It's much more important. This is the lining, so no one's ever going to see down in the bottom corner of your handbag if your seams line up perfectly. But you can feel it, and you want to get those lined up. Alternatively, you can push one seam to one side and the other seam to the other side and feel where they nest. But I like just to have these open. So that's pretty good. I'm just going to put a couple of clips on this. And then with my ruler, and this is just so awkward, but you just sort of stick this up here under your arm. With your ruler, where did my ruler go? Here we go. And a pen. All right, I've got my tools now. With this all lined up, I am going to take my ruler, lay it down from the corner, and not the seam allowance, but the corner, and mark 1 inch like this. And that's the line I'm going to sew on under the machine. And I'm going to do that for all 4 corners. I'm going to pull those out into a triangle, lay it down, and mark the 1 inch. Then I'm going to reach my hand in here, confirm whether I left the zipper open or not, and I did not. So I am going to take a minute and manipulate that zipper open. I'll be right back. All right, that was a little bit like trying to break into a car when you've locked your keys inside, but I've got the zipper open now. This is going to take, again, a little bit of manipulation. just to get this all folded down, fold open these seams and draw a line across the 1-inch line. So I'm going to wrestle this into submission. When I sew across this, I am going to go back and forth a few times to reinforce it, because this is the bottom of your bag and this is where you want a little bit of strength. So it's going to take me a little minute just to wrestle this a little. But once I have those pressed open with my fingers, pressed into shape, I'm going to draw that line and then take it over to the machine. With the 4 corners sewn flat, I was able to get the seams open quite nicely on this thicker part of the bag, but it turned out to be quite a lot harder on the lining for some reason. So I'm just going to cut these off with my scissors, leave about a 1/4 inch. These are just trash. Same thing down here on the lining. I ended up folding these seams over, like I said. I'm just going to snip those off on both sides. And then comes the magic, where we have to pull the entire bag through this hole. So I may end up putting this on fast forward. We'll see how difficult this turns out to be. Sometimes it's easier to pull the lining over this and then turn the whole thing inside out, but we'll see how it goes. So this, I mean, you want to be careful not to pull on too many seams, but by the same token, it sometimes needs a firm hand just to get it done. And it always seems like it's never going to work until all of a sudden the bag just pops out the way it's supposed to. So there's the lining largely over the whole bag. And now I can pull it all through. Ooh, the open zipper. There we go. This is actually turning out a lot easier than I thought it would. But look at this. It's just, how is this going to turn into a beautiful bag? But it will. This is the strap. And here we have, I've got my hand through that gap that we left in the bottom of the lining. And I am pushing out the bottom corners of the bag. There we go. And on the other side, I'm always surprised at how physical this is. There we go. Push those corners out. This is where you can check and see if the seam down the side of your bag lines up with the seam across the bottom, and not brilliant there, but ooh, bang on right there. So that's nice. Then we come up here and want to flip these little zipper tab parts. And this, I might, let's see about this side. This is where I might grab my bone folder. That might, oh no, that one turned out really well. Turned out really easily. Let me see if I can manipulate that side a little bit. I've just got my bone folder and I'm just going to use it to encourage this. There we go. So that tab end is turned out properly. All right. I could take this over to the iron. I may have more or less success just using my hands to push all of these edges and seams into place. But it is coming out well, I think. There we go. And then I'm just going to reach my hands inside now and make sure that that lining is all kind of pushed into place. And it is looking so good. The back is looking good with these great Waratahs and some kangaroo paw. I just love that. So I will pull out, oh, and we have the pocket on the inside here as well. These have nice structure to them. And then the pocket here in the front also has some great structure to it. I'm glad I put all of that extra interfacing into place because that does give the bag a lot of nice structure. So the last things to do are to seal up the inside. So pull up that lining again. Get this all lined up nice and neat. I'll probably press it before I do that, before I take it over to the sewing machine. But just press that space like this. I'm just going to do a light top stitch, and I have a little Made by Michelle tag that I will stick into the bottom of this lining. And then the last step is to follow the instructions in the pattern to get the strap finished. And this always, I always have to double and triple check how to do this just to make sure I get it right. But the pattern is really clear about how to put this into place properly. And I'm really glad that we've got the hardware at the front, the way that I like to wear my bag. The pattern has this normally on this side of the bag, but this piece of hardware here at the front. I like them both here. I think it adds a nice visual element to the final project. All right, I'm going to reference the pattern really carefully, weave this properly, ultimately fold that over and sew it so that it has a nice clean end to it. Sew up the inside of my lining and come back for the final reveal. And so this is the final reveal. I sewed up the bottom end of the bag and I put my little Made by Michelle tag in it. So I'm going to tuck the lining back in. I have put the strap on and followed the instructions in the pattern and wove the strap through the loops, through the hardware, and sewed up that end. And now with the hardware on the front of the bag, the way that I like it, with the zippers and the lining and the interfacing, I think it just looks fantastic. I'm really happy with it. I did learn another lesson, however. On the inside, my pocket, which has some great lining, is on the front. And I think for future bags, I would probably put that pocket on the back side of the bag. It does give me a ton of rigidity and stiffness in the front of the bag because this pocket here on the front is lined. And now the one that I've added on the inside is also got some interfacing in it. So there's a lot of rigidity in the front of the bag, but I think I'd probably balance it out in the future by making sure that that was on the other side for future attempts at this bag. This is the Koda Cross-Body Bag with a few adjustments to it. It's an excellent pattern. I will definitely be making it again, and I will definitely learn some of the lessons that I've learned here. Thanks very much for watching this video on the Koda Cross-Body Bag. I've learned a few things along the way, and I hope you enjoyed it. If, however, you are a quilter and you don't have bag hardware like zippers or buckles or D-rings or anything like that, but you're still interested in maybe trying to make a bag, I have taken inspiration from the Koda Cross-Body Bag and adjusted it a little bit to make it with no hardware. So I have a video coming up very soon called No Hardware, No Problem, to make a version of the Koda Cross-Body Bag. I hope you'll check that out. Thanks very much for watching, and don't forget to make the most of your fabric bits and pieces.